by knowing what she was talking about, particularly on foreign policy, but essentially the whole night, and by interrupting judiciously, and by ad-libbing appropriate and aggressive follow-up questions, Martha Raddatz helped cover a ton of ground that did not get touched in last week's debate, that has not been touched in the campaign much at all, really. And importantly, she helped expose some big blank spots on the policy map for the challenging party in this presidential race, which before last night had been able to get away with zero specifics on anything they did not want to be specific about. So last night, Paul Ryan either had to give specifics, or we finally got a giant national spotlight shining on the fact that he had no specifics to offer. That's why this debate was awesome. That's why this debate went fast. This was an exhilarating amount of ground to have covered in 90 minutes. An exhilarating amount of new information and new political truths that we did not know about before last night, but that we know now. It started right away. Paul Ryan saying we should have apologized for U.S. Marines urinating on Taliban corpses in Afghanistan, but he would not say, even when asked directly and when pressed with a follow-up, he would not say if the U.S. was right to apologize for burning Qurans. No answer, no position on that. The George W. Bush administration apologized for that. The Obama administration did too. Paul Ryan is running with a guy who literally wrote a book called No Apologies. Does he also mean no apology for that? No answer. Asked directly if a military strike on Iran would technically be an effective means of stopping Iran from developing a nuclear weapon, Vice President Biden said yes to that question. Paul Ryan, no answer. Asked what exactly a Romney-Ryan administration would do differently on Iran and on Syria that is more strong than what the Obama administration is doing, since they've criticized the administration as weak. What would they do that would be stronger? No answer from Paul Ryan, which led Joe Biden to say, hey, the only other thing we're not doing that we could be doing is war. Are you saying you want a war? No answer. Here's my favorite one.
Let me ask you quickly, what's your criteria for intervention?
Yeah.
In Syria?
Worldwide.
What is in the national interest of the American people?
How about
what
humanitarian
is in the national
interest?
Security of the American people? It's got to be in the strategic national interests of our country.
No humanitarian.
Each situation will come up with its own set of circumstances, but putting American troops on the ground, that's got to be within the national security interest of the American people.
So, Congressman, how will you make national security decisions about sending troops abroad? We will make those decisions by considering national security. Yes, Congressman, that's the topic at hand here. What are the grounds on which you would make that decision? Yes, we would make that decision about the national security. We would base it on national security. Hall pass for the bathroom, please. Mr. Ryan also flatly denied his campaign's stated position that military spending should go up by $2 trillion. Mr. Romney has been guaranteeing that he will reserve a specific proportion of GDP to be spent on the military no matter what our defense needs are. That is a promise of a huge, huge increase in military spending. A huge increase that the Pentagon says it does not want. It's been called a force-feeding plan for the Pentagon. The Romney-Ryan spending plan here. But last night, Martha Raddatz's questioning and Joe Biden's badgering got Paul Ryan to disavow this plan altogether, saying he does not want an increase at all, despite the fact that it is what he and Mr. Romney have been campaigning on. Paul Ryan broke new ground on saying how and why he and Mitt Romney would overturn Roe versus Wade and make abortion criminal. His answer on rape in particular has people going nuts today for obvious reasons. We will be covering that in future shows. Joe Biden also dipped Paul Ryan in tar and rolled him in feathers on the issue of the stimulus and Mr. Ryan's supposed principles on that issue. We talked about that moments ago with Chris Hayes. But there are two things that I think are hugely important to the presidential campaign that happened last night. Two things that I, frankly, never thought we would get to, and that we got to, and boy, howdy, is this new territory. First was this.
You asked, do I feel free? Let me put it to you this way. I earned capital in the campaign, political capital, and now I intend to spend it. It is my style. That's what happened in after the 2000 election. I earned some capital. I've earned capital in this election, and I'm going to spend it for what I've told the people I'd spend it on, which is, you've heard the agenda, Social Security. And
Social Security, first on the list. When George W. Bush won re-election in 2004, the first thing he said he wanted to spend his political capital on, first on the list, was Social Security. Specifically, what he meant was privatizing Social Security. No more Social Security safety net, just hand it over to Wall Street and hope your numbers come up as cherries instead of lemons when the Wall Street slot machine dials stop spinning. Minus the fees from your broker, of course, Grandma. Did they warn you about those fees? The Republican plan in the second Bush term to privatize Social Security was a political disaster. The more President George W. Bush traveled around the country and talked about this idea, the less popular the idea became. And it started off about as popular as food poisoning. And at the time that George W. Bush was traveling around the country promoting this disastrous idea, back in Washington, back in the House of Representatives, a young, radically conservative congressman from Wisconsin was promoting legislation in the House that would privatize Social Security even faster than the Bush plan, and more radically than the Bush plan, and with an even bigger direct payoff for Wall Street. Even the Bush administration at the time denounced Paul Ryan's version of privatizing Social Security as irresponsible. But he really believed in it, and he did not give up on it after trying and failing, along with George W. Bush, to privatize Social Security in 2005. In his budget in 2008, he said we should privatize Social Security. In his budget in 2010, he said we should privatize Social Security. It was not until last year that Paul Ryan dropped privatizing Social Security, that old, disastrous George W. Bush idea, from his Paul Ryan budgets. So there was some suspense heading into last night, right? This is a big, potent political issue, and the Democrats have been keeping their powder dry on this. Is Biden going to hold Paul Ryan to it? Is Paul Ryan going to have to disavow something he's been working on since even before the P90X workout was invented? Is he going to have to disavow this thing that he has stood for so long, now that he's trying not to stand for it on the national stage? How is he going to handle this?
You were one of the few lawmakers to stand with President Bush when he was seeking to partially privatize Social Security.
For younger people.
For younger people. This is what Bush said back then, too. It's just for younger people. Don't worry, Grandma. We'll privatize it for everyone who isn't getting it yet. So you're grandfathered in, grandfather, but then we're killing it. This is the same old George W. Bush argument. They thought that this made it seem less scary.
For younger people, what we said then, and what I've always agreed, is let younger Americans have a voluntary choice of making their money work faster for them within the Social Security system. That's not what Mitt Romney's proposing. What we're saying is no changes for anybody 55 and above.
When Charlie Pierce from Boston wrote up that moment from the debate at Esquire magazine today, he wrote this: "You could hear the screams from Romney headquarters all the way up the Charles to where I was watching." Democrats have so far been keeping their powder dry on this very, very potent issue, on the Republicans wanting to privatize Social Security. Not just privatizing Medicare and thereby getting rid of it, which has been an issue in this campaign, but privatizing Social Security and thereby getting rid of it. Before last night, that was Paul Ryan's record, and it was George W. Bush's record. But nobody knew if Romney and Ryan were going to try to drag that old, disastrous idea over the threshold of the White House with them. Now we know they are dragging it with them, which is amazing. But I said there were 2 points from last night. And one last thing I think needs to be mentioned that I think changed the race last night, and it's the war. Before the debate started, there was a really weird moment. This was yesterday, but before the debate, it was on Fox News. It's a weird moment when George W. Bush's Iraq war spokesman, who was Paul Ryan's senior staffer on this campaign, is a man named Dan Senor, and he went on Fox News yesterday afternoon to try to explain what the Republican position is now on the war in Afghanistan. Dan Senor said that Romney and Ryan support the president's timeline for leaving Afghanistan in 2014, but then he also screwed up and said this.
So this is important. Governor Romney has always said it is a mistake to broadcast timelines, if you're the commander-in-chief, to broadcast timelines so our enemies are in the know about our next move.
It's a weird mistake, right? I mean, you can't be on board totally with the timeline and then say the timeline is a huge mistake, broadcasting a date to our enemies. So that was a weird thing that happened on Fox News before the debate. Paul Ryan's senior staffer on the campaign. Then at the debate, it turned out that was not a mistake. They are trying to say this is a policy.
And with respect to Afghanistan, the 2014 deadline, we agree with the 2014 transition.
Oh, okay. You agree with the timeline to leave in 2014. So you don't agree with your senior staffer guy who went crazy on Fox News today and said a timeline is a big mistake? A broadcast to our enemies? You agree with the transition. You agree with the deadline of 2014. I'm glad to know that you agree with that, because it was crazy when your senior staffer guy said that that would be a big mistake.
We don't want to broadcast to our enemies, put a date on your calendar, wait us out, and then come back.
What used to be frustrating is that the Republican side in this campaign was not capable of or willing to talk about the war in Afghanistan, for which they would be assuming responsibility if they were elected. Eek. Well, last night they finally did have to talk about it because the debate was really good. And their position apparently is that we should leave in 2014, because saying we are going to leave in 2014 is a huge mistake. We used to talk about something called a commander-in-chief test in vice presidential politics. Last night was that test for Congressman Paul Ryan. How would you grade him on that test?